It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is a special guest, an author, an artist, Cyn Ribbon. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you, Tim.
Well, it's good to have you on the show. So what sort of stuff do you do creatively?
I'm kind of a jack of all trades. I'm a painter. I studied painting in college. But I'm also a writer, obviously. Mm-hmm. I wrote a short little podcast, and I'm about to release my first urban fantasy novel.
Nice. I do have a soft spot for the fantasy. I'm actually working on re-releasing some urban fantasy stories novels that I wrote a while ago.
Oh, awesome.
One of those was the first book I published, but it was so problematic as far as we don't need to go into too deeply, but it was difficult because it was a difficult book to read. And so I'm like, this can't be the first book in my series, you know?
Yeah.
People aren't going to be able to get through it. And that's generally been the problem with my early work. Anyway, so you say urban fantasy, but what sort of inspiration drives you to write fantasy? What'd you say?
Well, I really love fantasy because I think it presents new perspectives, for people to digest. I think it can show us new worlds, new cultures, and that inadvertently kind of makes us examine our own culture and our own lives. It really creates, it just stretches the boundaries of the imagination while also kind of transporting us to new possibilities of what can be and, showing us new inventions, new technology. I just find that aspect of it really fascinating.
Cool. Yeah, I basically I agree for the most part. I think that's a lot of the drive I have toward it as well. Though, of course, I also like the strange creatures and the impossible things, the impossible worlds.
Oh yeah,
kind of stuff. That's definitely my emphasis when I write fantasy and science fiction as well. But do you have any favorite books you start that from that have pushed you toward this genre? Do you if you've read a lot in the past or anything like that? Any sources, as it were?
Well, actually, I think the first fantasy books I started reading and this was in middle school, I started reading Amelia Atwater Rhodes. She was kind of a small author. I don't think many people have heard of her, but she wrote vampire stuff like that. And this was before, Twilight and everything. And I really got immersed in those, but I was just a big fan of fantasy, pretty much all throughout my life. I loved, the fantasy cartoons, The Last Unicorn and, Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z and stuff like that. And I studied film in school, and I was always, really drawn to fantasy films and fantasy TV shows and stuff like that. So it's just been something whether it's been books, movies, video games, RPGs have been a huge influence for me.
Computer RPGs?
Yeah, Final Fantasy and, Grandia, and I played Mass Effect and stuff like that.
Nice. I've not played a lot of computer RPGs. I'm more of a tabletop RPG guy, but yeah, that's enough about me. Anyway, in that regard, I like my my Dungeons and Dragons growing up, that kind of thing. But as far as the inspiration, obviously, do you think the background of it sounds like your background in in film, in art, have those informed your writing process at all?
Oh, most definitely. I think I approach writing from the point of view of a filmmaker, because when I'm framing a scene, when I'm writing it down, I'm thinking okay, what do I need to describe in detail? And in my head, I'm watching it like a film. So I kind of immerse myself in the space, and then I'm thinking okay, what would I have a close up on? And that's what I need to have detail about. Because I typically watch my stories in my head. So I have to watch them play out first, and then I basically just write down what I see.
Yes. That makes sense. I watched there's this YouTube channel, Cinefix, I think it's called. But it's the guy on the guy who produces that show or does the main voice on the show I watched on that channel is Clint Gage, but he talks, and he's an author as well as a TV creator, and they had this great video about, I think it was Mad Max Fury Road.
Oh,
Where
I love that movie.
It's such a good movie, but where they talk about where where he dissects, and well, the crew there probably, but he reads the scripts or whatever. But they dissect the moments of, you know, the shots in one of the chase sequences of that movie, and how the note there is that you really only get to show the reader the audience one thing at a time in a movie, because you get one frame at a time.
Yes.
And it's actually very similar in a book. So I can see that. So I thought that was really informative. It's really stuck with me. It's been a while since I saw that YouTube video.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's cool. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it might be a little hard to dig that one up, but I mean, Cinefix, Fury Road, you should probably find it pretty easily, I guess.
Okay.
And it is, and that's the kind of thing that I thought, like, I found that very informative, because in a book it feels like, oh, you're doing all these things at once, and it seems that way in a movie too, because everything happens quite quickly. You know, at least that's my thought about it.
Oh no, that's completely true. Because there's some moments in a book where it's like people are talking all at once, but you still have to write it line by line. You know.
Oh yeah, yeah, and the effect of, you know, when you read something it's one character says something, then another character, and none of these are the same character, right? You know, it just keeps and more characters just chime in. After the third one, even at the third one, it becomes like, wow, there's a lot of people here. That's how it feels to me when I'm writing anyway.
Yeah, my book has 10 characters, and the final scene is all 10 of them together in one room. So that was a bit of a challenge.
Oh boy, you know, I can't. I'm thinking 3 or 4 is a lot, but yeah, 10 that sounds incredible. Sounds like a real challenging scene to create. Yeah. Especially, I mean, and actually, I don't know how. I mean, this is kind of nitty gritty here, but I find it really difficult to just have, you know, more than 4 characters in a scene, even.
It's definitely a challenge, and it was something I really had to approach carefully. And you have to weigh, like, okay, like, who's talking, who would speak up at this moment, you know, who has that kind of personality, who would kind of, you know, stay out of it and is more introverted. So you're juggling a lot of personalities, and it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, not to mention their speaking voices if you're going with extremely different ones, especially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of them are from different countries and they have different accents. So, you know, you have to take that into consideration as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned how you mentioned to me that you were a painter as well. So I'm assuming you don't do just abstract stuff necessarily, or what kind of stuff do you paint?
Usually, well, lately for the past year or so, it's been mainly portraits, and I like to incorporate like sort of like cosmic space type stuff. Like science is a really huge influence in my storytelling and in my artwork. I'm like a really big fan of astronomy. So kind of a little bit of abstraction, but, you know, it's mainly figurative. And right now I'm doing the cover for the book, so it's, you know, just a whole bunch of people. I mean, but it pretty much centers around like the figure, and then just kind of expanding from that with, like, you know, color and movement and line and shape.
That sounds like a good idea for a book cover. I mean, I was taken to task about book covers at one point, but because I've been making my own covers since the beginning of my releases, and I was so bad at it initially. It's kind of ridiculous. But no, I mean, I'm not an artist. I'm not visually skilled. I was just Photoshop stuff together, and I've gotten pretty good at Photoshop. And even when I was getting okay at Photoshop, I would usually make a pretty bad cover because I'd be a little lazy, or I wouldn't know I didn't know what made a good cover. Yeah. And one of the other guests I've had on this show before, Zigzag Claiborne, mentioned to me he was on Facebook, and he's like, yeah, you know, maybe you want. He mentioned how you really need like a central kind of piece for the cover, but then you don't need a lot else. It's like simple is better on a book cover a lot of the time.
Yeah.
That kind of hit me hard, because I was like, I'm trying to put everything in to make this book make sense on the cover, but that's not what you're supposed to do with the book cover, right? That's not the aim.
Well, I don't know. I feel like I might be risking it a little bit with mine, because I'm trying to put the 10 characters on the cover, but I'm composing it in such a way that they're all on one side, and then the text is really big on the other side.
Oh, that sounds interesting. At least, I mean, it should be cool looking. If not, I mean, even if it is risky, it sounds cool. I was just saying.
Yeah, I figure, I'm going to try it. I'm going to see how it does. And worst case scenario, maybe I go to another artist. But I actually designed it more so like after a comic book cover.
Okay.
Just because the story I feel like is kind of evocative of, like comics and video games and, anime and manga and stuff like that. Like the kind of stuff I grew up on. That's where my stories got their inspiration. So it seemed appropriate.
Oh yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, is there like a superhero element to your story, or is it? Yeah.
Well, it's sort of, but not in a traditional, I'm wearing spandex and I'm saving the day kind of a thing.
Yeah, but Dragon Ball Z has kind of a superhero element to it, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
So does Sailor Moon.
Yeah. So yes, there's definitely there's supernatural powers. So yeah, there's going to be like levels of heroics and, trying to save people and protect the innocent a little bit. So yeah, I mean, those elements are definitely in there.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I meant. I guess you did describe it as urban fantasy, and now there is a little niche superhero genre in fiction. So I kind of assumed it wasn't actually about people in capes.
Well, that's really come back now. So.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, but mostly in the movies. In the books, it's still a pretty small market, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite so.
I keep hearing about how hard it is to make it be successful, depending on what your definition of success is, of course, in getting tons of readers as a superhero fiction author and not as a comic writer.
Yeah, that makes sense. But
because it's just the tradition is just in the other form.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I would say my inspiration lies more so with like human relationships, and then the supernatural powers and the fantasy elements are kind of more of like an accent piece to just drive that forward and really accentuate it and create, these really like life or death situations so that those relationships can be fully examined.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. But that sounds like a really strong way to tell a story, if you ask me. I mean, it sounds like a very, make it more intense than your average, serialized. We're going to do this time. We're going to do a similar thing next time, kind of thing. Like some of the superhero TV shows definitely fall into that trap a lot.
Oh yeah, it does get repetitive.
Yeah, the nature of a show like even the ones I like, kind of fall into that category. I'm not going to name any names because I have kind of a dim view of a lot of them. But the point is. The point is not to bash on this show because I think, yeah. Anyway, whatever. I should just shut up about that. But as far as publishing, do you have any? Do you have you studied any stuff, any market related stuff, as far as what you're planning to do with your new release?
So market related, as in like how am I marketing the book?
Yes, exactly. Sorry, I talk around things.
Well, I've been reaching out to people to do reviews of the book and, reaching out to podcasts like this one. And, just honestly, I've just been trying to meet other authors and just network in a very organic way. It's kind of hard to just say, look at me over and over again.
Not effective either.
Yeah, exactly. So I've just been trying to connect with other authors. I've been looking into other like urban fantasy and young adult books and stuff like that, although mine is more of a new adult. But just kind of trying to study the market and, of course, reading like a ton of articles about like, how to price your book and, marketing a book and how to launch a book and all of that stuff. So I'm taking it in stride and I'm just trying to like tell, all my friends and prominent blogs and stuff like that, hey, I've got this thing coming out, and hopefully it will be a fairly organic train from there. And then I might experiment with Amazon advertising. But I'm just going to see how it does at first. Okay.
So I should probably ask you what the title of the book is. I don't believe you mentioned it.
Oh yeah. So it's 10. After,
okay.
Like TEN, the number after the 10 characters. But it's going to be a trilogy because the full thing I think is going to be like 150 to like 200,000 words. And that was just way too much for one book. So I just decided to break it down. So 10 part 1 is what's releasing.
Cool. And do you have a firm date in mind for that yet? I'm just curious.
Sometime this month.
Okay, so January 2019. Yeah.
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah, I've been working on the cover, but I have tendonitis in my wrist, so unfortunately that's been slowing me down a little bit.
Yeah, the old RSI. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, the manuscript's done. It's just waiting on like the technical stuff now.
I misheard that as tentacle stuff, but never mind.
Oh,
we're not going in there.
Goodness, no.
I'm not going there anymore. Waiting on tentacle stuff. Sorry, couldn't help it. So anyway, so as you worked on this book, did you do any particular take on your reading as far as reducing, not reading in genre, reading specific things to help you emphasize different? I mean, I've heard of authors doing all sorts of tricks with what they read to, and then using that to influence their book or avoid influencing their book. Did you do anything like that?
Well, I usually avoid reading, and because my book requires a lot of research, I was mainly reading like nonfiction, and I was reading articles and stuff like that. I do, to a certain extent, try to avoid reading other books because I don't want to be influenced, but every now and then I'll get kind of stuck on a scene, or it feels like I'm using the same language over and over, and then I'll maybe go read some poetry, or I'll consult another book just to kind of get an idea. It's almost like you get so immersed in it, you kind of forget how to write, weirdly.
No, I understand that feeling. Yeah. And breaking out of it. I mean, I'm pretty slow as a reader right now, but I try to start a different book if I'm stuck on my current book, because I lose interest very quickly in a lot of books I read, but also because I've ADHD. I just jump around a lot. It's hard for me to push through the middle of a story, both when I'm writing it and when I'm reading it, honestly.
Oh, I get that. The details. Sometimes what I will do if I'm getting bored with a story is I'll like skip ahead and then read backwards.
Oh boy. I actually had a professor who, I was an English major, but I had one of my professors who I ran into after, a few years after graduating. And she said that she recommended something similar. And this is an English professor. I thought that was pretty amusing. It's like, you're not reading books because you have to. So just read them however you want. It makes sense to me. I think that's pretty good advice in general.
Oh yeah, wow. Huh. I didn't know I was using a technique.
Well, it's not. I never thought of it that way exactly. I just remember thinking, that's actually kind of interesting advice to get from somebody who doesn't, when I was in her class, if you didn't read every word, you might be in trouble. It's that kind of thing. But when you're reading for fun, that's the only purpose it has.
Oh yeah.
Or for, a particular emotional effect. It doesn't really matter if you read it out of order.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, obviously there's risks to it, but there's risks to reading in order. And that's kind of called getting bored. Anyway.
Actually, you brought up your book covers, and I actually looked them up on Amazon, and I'm like, oh wow, these look really good. I'm very impressed.
Well, the early ones got taken down. You're not seeing the bad ones.
Oh, okay. I'm seeing the best of the best. Yeah,
the ones that are currently up there are the ones I think still work, because I've replaced a good half the books that I have out. I replaced the cover at some point. Mm-hmm. And but not every book got republished. Most of them have the same title that they started with.
Yeah.
But again, my urban fantasy stuff was like, this is barely urban fantasy at all. It was so out there because most of the book took place in various other dimensions and stuff, and yet it wasn't really portal fantasy. It was very hard to measure what that series was, which is one of the reasons I kind of put it on hold and took it down, even though there were 2 books in it.
Okay.
And I just recently redid the covers. And I'm like, wow, okay, now with the new titles and everything. And I'm like, now I'm excited about this again. So I think I might be able to get that the trilogy back up this year.
Oh, good.
Or the first 3 books at least. Yeah. Well, hopefully other people will as well. Although, one's a good start.
Yes, very much so.
Anyway, yeah. So I I say that an awful lot. Getting self-conscious. It must be past 8. So the thing is, as far as so you say you don't read a whole lot as far as other fiction. What kind of media do you watch? Do you consume in general these days?
Well, now that the manuscript's done, I'm reading a little bit. I got a book for Christmas. It's by the physicist Michio Kaku, and it's called The Future of the Mind. So it's kind of research for my book, but it's also just fun nonfiction. And then one fiction book I've been poking around with, although it's kind of on hold now because I'm doing the cover, is The Rule of One by Ashley and Leslie. God, is it Sanders or Saunders? I'm not sure. But they're twins.
I think people can spell it probably, right?
Yeah. So that's like a young adult book, and I've been poking around with that one as well. But I haven't gotten too far into it, so I'll reserve reviewing it or anything like that. But I'll just put on like comedy or like background TV and stuff like that. I'll listen to other podcasts, or sometimes I stream like video games or something. When I'm doing art, I tend to mainly listen to music, so I haven't been watching too much TV. I've been wanting to watch Bird Box though, since that just came out.
I keep hearing about this movie, and it seems like it's broken the base a little bit. The internet appears to be kind of divided on it, is what I mean.
Yeah, I'll have to watch it and see, because I've heard it's kind of like a quiet place, but I don't know. I'll have to find out.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was kind of an eclectic but for a writer, that's interesting that you don't read a whole lot. I just think that's, most writers that I speak to on here have a much longer, much more fiction on their docket. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. Obviously, everyone's their own person.
Well, I have a lot of nonfiction, so it's like I read. It's usually stuff like that is going to inspire my stories, or it's going to be research for my stories. And because when I create a story, it's like it's a whole universe, and I'm completely immersed in it. And because of that, it's hard for me to kind of get into like another universe. Like I'm really horrible with multitasking, and I can only really focus on one thing at a time. So I think it just kind of makes it hard for me to like develop my own world if I'm like immersed in the world of somebody else.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I'm thinking maybe there's a lesson there for me as well, because I've been really slow as a writer, and for a lot of reasons lately. At least I feel like I've been really slow. Some people say I'm very effective, very fast. I feel like I've slowed down a lot, and I'm trying to speed back up again.
Okay.
But I have been for several years. That's kind of the spot I've been in. I feel like so maybe I'm getting faster, and I just don't notice because I'm too caught up in my own head. But the thing I see is that I don't focus very well on the story. And the best stories I've done, like this series I'm releasing now, the space opera series, where it's set in a very unique setting, the Pillar universe, which I don't think there's anything else like it out there. I'm pretty confident saying that, as far as the universe of the story, where it's this crazy I almost said theoretical physics. I mean the speculative physics, as in the universe doesn't have planets or stars in it. It's a pretty crazy universe in that way. It's got different constructions in it, and the laws of physics are slightly different. And this is but I wrote all 3 of the first books in that series a few years ago, and I wrote them all in 1 year, about 150,000 words.
Wow.
But that, in addition to a bunch of other books that I wrote in the middle, because I was freelancing at that point, I ghost wrote a few books. And so but every time after I was done ghostwriting, I was like, wow, I really want to go back to that other book, because I thought of it all as one book at the time, and it's just kind of like, I just need to go back and do more of that story.
Yeah.
And so I totally understand the immersion thing. Yeah.
It's almost like a ritual in a really weird way. Because I said I watch it like a movie. It's very immersive, and I'll very often cry during scenes, or I get like really emotionally invested, and it's almost like I have to step back out of it and remember, okay, these people aren't real. This is a work of fiction, because it's so immersive. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it would help you to kind of think of it that way and sort of imagine entering this other space.
Well, that's a really interesting. I think you're right. I think I've got to try that. I've got to try putting my head more in the book and getting, and also because that's a great, I think that would help my stress level too, because I get so stressed out with the news and everything these days. Not we're not going into that, but everything about the world today kind of just puts me on edge. It's hard to
Oh, I understand that.
hard to stay in the fiction. However, I'm trying to do it.
Oh yeah, it's kind of an escape and kind of a healthy escape.
Yeah, I mean it's a little better than it's better than just doing all the drugs you can find, because frankly, it's a lot safer.
Yeah, or could go the Hemingway route and be an alcoholic, I guess. I don't know.
You know, yeah, and then you get the electroshocks, and that's the end of you. Well, whatever. Yeah, poor guy. Well, he was kind of a jerk, though. I mean, not to say that, and not to sound about Hemingway. He was a very complicated character.
So it would seem.
Well, I mean, or maybe not that complicated, but whatever. He was weird at any rate, as most writers tend to be. Let's be fair.
Yeah, we're all a little weird. Yeah. I think I heard he started his morning with like 2 Hemingway daiquiris, like every day, which had like a ridiculous amount of rum in them.
I'm not surprised. I bet that's true. But he also was known for lying about his process and the sort of thing he did.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like he would say, like he'd make, especially when he was talking about writing process, he would just make up things and tell people who asked him just random stuff.
So he was a troll, basically.
Yeah, he trolled people, especially other writers or young writers who wanted to find things out. I can kind of see why he'd do it, but that's one of the reasons I say he was kind of an interesting dude.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just gonna pretend, or I think that quote where it's writing's really easy. All you do is sit at the typewriter and open a vein. I think that's Hemingway. That was a Hemingway quote. But can you believe? But can we trust any of his quotes about writing? Probably not, because he is this, But he managed to hide that reputation, that what he actually did, which was lying about his process a lot.
Yeah.
So there you go. And most of his stuff was really short too. And I wonder, I've gotten to the point where it's much easier for me to write. Well, it's not even easier to write short things. It's just hard for me to write anything of length at any speed.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that's kind of because I used to, and speaking of Hemingway, I used to kind of like the style he wrote in. But now I'm like, but it's very limiting to try to be terse, Yeah. As far as what you're describing.
I think we live like in a binge culture now, though, where shorter things are probably more easily digested.
True.
So, I've heard other authors like Joanna Penn, saying, you can break things up into smaller chunks, and, other authors that have broken things up almost in like small, like 100, 150 page segments, and they'll sell that for like 99 cents or what have you. And, sometimes it's just easier to work like that. So it's not necessarily a bad strategy. I don't know if it's more effective, but, with the culture that we live in now and everybody wanting to just like consume everything, I don't think it's a bad route to go.
Well, no, I wouldn't say it's bad. It's just, I'm not sure if I like it. Maybe that's what I should say for myself, because I did publish I published these 6 fantasy novellas last year. Mm-hmm. And they were, and the 3 I wrote last year were all under 100 pages. And I felt like, this feels really weird. Those later 3 of them were all like, these are fun stories, but I feel like I'm rushing, and yet I'm also moving very slowly. It was very weird. It was like I'm just removing elements before I write the book, kind of thing. Or as I write the book, stuff gets taken out before it ever meets the page. And that made me feel very strange. Yeah.
No, I totally get that. And actually, I struggled with that with my novel a bit too, because I thought like, God, I feel like I'm going into so much detail and I'm spending so much time. And then I would look at another book and be like, oh God, this goes on forever. Like, I'm very succinct. So I completely get that. Like, you can kind of go back and forth of like, does this really need to be in there? And you feel like it's taking forever, and then it ends up not taking very much time, or vice versa.
Yeah. I gotta say that the difficulty, and this is maybe too geeky for non-writers to really get, but the point at which you decide this, and even a lot of writers probably are not going to be that interested in this, and probably shouldn't say it, but here we go anyway. I think it's interesting how often, to me anyway, how a book can be both shorter in length and more difficult, I guess, to read, versus being a book that's kind of where everything's just there. and it's easier to read, but it's much bigger. It's like twice the length, say. Because I've done both kinds of book, and frankly, I think the ones that are longer and just have have more details out there tend to be more popular for me anyway. But I have such a small sample size. Not many people read my work just yet. That it's not probably not. But I think there's just a certain amount of accessibility you get from putting more details on the page.
Yeah, I guess I'll
versus just making people read into it. Yeah, it's just my theory there, but or my not even a theory, my hypothesis, and it's not really tested at this point. So
yeah. I guess I'll find out with my book, because I don't know. I tried to put details that seemed important, but also not be too wordy. So I don't know. We'll see. I'm rolling the dice.
Well, for me, it's a matter of a paragraph. Yeah, and I can see. I don't want to try to. I'm not jinxing anything here. And different writers are successful for different reasons too. So I think it can work either way.
Yeah, that's true.
I guess what then is like I almost always level out like if I do 2 paragraphs of description or action, I gotta have something to change it up soon after that. That's just how I feel. I was like, I can't go very long without doing some kind of shift.
No, I think I'm the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Oh God. I mean, I looked into Twilight a little bit just for research. I did not want to read it, but it's like, okay, I need a grasp of like what people are reading and why, like, this is a popular book. So I want to see what the style of it was like. So I remember I read a little bit of the beginning, and I'm just like, Jesus Christ, get to the point. Like,
move forever. On. Yeah.
But that was a really popular book. So it just goes to show.
Yeah, well, I got 1 chapter into Twilight. I couldn't get any further. But
yeah, I don't blame you.
Yeah, I just think I think there's when a book becomes that popular, I think there's a certain amount of, well, somebody just rolled a natural 20. Somebody just got the best possible result, even though they didn't necessarily have the best thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know how much you can actually learn from a book just because it's super successful, but there's something for sure. There's something there.
Well, God, there were 4 or 5 books in the series, so
I think there's 4. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, she was doing something right.
I suppose so.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but I mean, this is kind of a writer hobby. Is like, yeah, let's bash very successful authors a little bit. But I don't think it's a big deal. I mean, she's got her probably millions of dollars from that franchise at least.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and we don't, she's never gonna listen to the show. But even if she did, I'd say it's like, you got to take the bitter with the sweet. You made all the money, and you got nerds complaining. That's normal. Nerds complain about every franchise anyway. It's normal.
I'm just not really a romance person, particularly a vampire romance. But I mean, I was just surprised by her writing style. That it takes so long for things to happen. I was like, I'm amazed. Like, teenagers had the attention span to get through this.
That's a good point. This other book that I'm currently reading very slowly, but it's very fast paced. The Black Company by Glenn Cook. And it's military fantasy, so it's about this military unit in this fantasy setting, and they are, but things can happen. Like a paragraph tells a little story in that book, and it's not, and that story might take place over a day or a week, and then they all string together and make one larger story. It's kind of insane how fast paced it is. So that you might find that interesting if you're into that.
Oh yeah. That sounds really intriguing.
It was the Tor free book of the month, or book club of the month a few months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept hearing, and I'd heard about it forever. And I'm like, I got to give this a shot. And it's almost hard to stay on it because of how fast it moves. It's like I'm holding on to this horse and I don't have a saddle. Anyway.
Man.
So we're about out of time. So thanks for being on the show, Sin.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you had me. It was a fun conversation.
Great. So where can people find your work, and if anywhere on the internet?
Oh, so so my artwork is at sinribbon.com, which is pretty easy. And then so links to my podcast, In Her Burning, and then links to my book, 10 Part 1, you can find at universe.vision. 10 Part 1 will also be up on Amazon as well. And you can find In Her Burning through any podcast app as well.
Wonderful. Thanks for being on the show. And yeah, as for Alive After Reading, you can find this podcast at mentalstellarpublications.com. You can, or Libsyn.com. We're now hosted by Libsyn. And you can find my books on Amazon.com, currently exclusive with just about everything. But you can find them all there. And, there's ways you can read Amazon books wherever, on whatever device you want. So I'd encourage you to check out, especially Stormfleet, which is the first book of the Pillar Universe series, if you haven't already. And but if you like fantasy, definitely check out the Court Mage, the first book of the Spells of the Curtain series, which is my fantasy stuff. And I should have the 7th book of that series out this year. I'm not going to promise anything, but I think it should happen. So keep your eyes peeled for more stuff from me. Thanks for listening, everybody, and good night.
That tears it.